They always said Evan needed more help, more support, more time to get things right. And I guess for a while I believed it too. I let it roll off me. Even when they gave him my bedroom when I moved out, even when he wrecked the family van, and they bought him another one like it was nothing. But the Dodge? That was mine. No one could spin it differently. My grandfather gave it to me, rusted out and damn near undrivable, and I spent a year of my life bringing it back from the dead. It was the first thing I ever owned that felt like mine in every way. And still, they took it. Like it meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I'm 45 now. Work at a garage in Dayton, Ohio. Not a fancy place, just a one-bay shop out by the train tracks, with a busted Coke machine and a stray cat that's decided I belong to her. Life's quiet. Sometimes too quiet. Especially now that it's just me. No wife, no kids. Just work, Pop's old house, and the charger. I've learned to live small. Took me a long time to stop trying to get their approval. Longer still to stop hoping they'd see me at all. Pop was the only one who ever did. It was late fall when he handed me the keys. Didn't even wrap it up as a big gesture. Just said, "Take it if you want it. She's been sitting 20 years and probably ain't worth the gas to tow it." He was wrong. She was worth everything. That charger was my therapy, my church, my Friday nights. I stripped it down bolt by bolt. Replaced the entire suspension, rewired the ignition system, sanded through layers of rust until my fingers bled. I worked overtime just to afford parts. It was the first time in years I felt like I was building something no one could touch. Not Evan. Not my folks. Not the past. Funny how I let myself believe it was safe. Pop had a stroke on a Thursday. I drove straight to the hospital in Cincinnati. He was still breathing when I got there, but not much else. I stayed 3 nights in that god-awful waiting room. Plastic chairs, stale vending machine coffee, TV stuck on a loop of the same 5 news stories. On Sunday, Mom told me to go home, get some sleep. I should have known. That's when they did it. When I pulled into my driveway, the garage door was wide open. The charger was gone. At first, I thought it had been stolen. Maybe I left the door unlocked. Maybe someone got lucky. I checked the cameras I had up, but the Wi-Fi had been unplugged. I called the cops. Then my neighbor came out with his dog and said, "Hey, your brother came by Friday. Thought you finally let him drive it." I didn't respond. I just nodded. But something cracked in me right then. A switch flipped. Because I didn't hand over that car. I didn't sign it away. And this time, I wasn't gonna let it slide. My earliest memory of Evan is him crying, and Mom telling me I needed to give him whatever toy I was holding because he was little, because I was older, because I needed to be a good brother. She said it gently, with that tired smile she wore like a shield. But it stuck. That's how it always was. Evan took. I gave. And if I complained, I was selfish. Family dinners? Evan talked. They listened. When I said something, Dad would grunt, nod, and turn back to Evan, asking about whatever sports team he'd joined or quit. Christmases? Evan got bikes, game consoles, new sneakers. I got socks, books, hand-me-down coats. And they acted like I was wrong to notice. I learned early to keep quiet. Easier than feeling forgotten every time I opened my mouth. I got used to it, I guess. Got numb. Built a shell around myself, so nothing could hurt me anymore. It almost worked, until Evan totaled Dad's pickup at 17. My folks hugged him, told him mistakes happen. Dad even laughed, said insurance would handle it. 2 years later, when I scraped Mom's old Buick backing out of the driveway, they screamed at me until I could barely stand. Mom cried, not for me, but because I'd ruined something important to her. Dad shook his head in disgust. "I expected better from you," he said, and I felt that weight deep in my bones. Why was so much expected from me and so little from him? Evan grew up believing the world owed him something. And my parents reinforced it every day. They paid for his bail when he got arrested for shoplifting at 19. Bought him a new TV when he smashed the last one during some drunken party at 22. He'd blow money on dumb stuff, then guilt-trip them into paying his rent. I worked double shifts at garages to keep a roof over my head. Evan floated by on excuses and charm. It always amazed me how easy life was for him and how impossible it felt for me. So I did what I always did. I pulled back, distanced myself, found refuge in small things. My work, the cars I fixed, the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't need them. But deep down, the kid who just wanted to be seen never went away. When Pop gave me the charger, it felt different. Like maybe someone finally noticed. Like maybe after 40-something years, it was my turn. So I poured my heart into that car, sanding away rust and self-doubt. I guess part of me hoped they'd finally see my worth, that if I made something beautiful, they'd finally stop looking past me. But now I see how stupid that was. How desperate. Because the truth is, they did see my worth. They just didn't care. They saw the work I'd done, the pride I felt, and they still gave it to Evan anyway. Because that's what they've always done. And this time I wasn't going to swallow it. This time, I'd fight back. Even if it cost me everything. Pop wasn't a sentimental man. Didn't do hugs, didn't say I love you easily, didn't smile much either. But he understood things, understood people, in ways most folks never bothered to try. Maybe it was his years in the army, or the tough life he'd lived afterward. But he had this quiet way of knowing when you needed him most. He didn't fuss over Evan. He never played favorites. Pop saw me clearly, even when I tried hard to be invisible. When I was 13, I started helping him around his place, out near the edge of Dayton. Just a small brick house with an old wooden shed that smelled like oil, metal, and cigarettes. We'd fix lawnmowers, tractors, sometimes old motorcycles he'd drag home. He never gave much instruction, just tossed me tools and let me figure it out. I got good with my hands quick. He noticed, nodding approval with the smallest gestures, a grunt, a pat on the shoulder. It meant more than I could ever say. Years passed, and that old Dodge Charger sat in Pop's yard the whole time, buried under a tarp and layers of fallen leaves. I'd asked about it a few times, but Pop would just shrug. Someday, he'd say. Someday came on a chilly Saturday afternoon. He handed me the keys without ceremony. Yours if you want it, but it'll take some real work. And then he went back inside to watch baseball like it was nothing special. But we both knew it was. That first day, I pulled the tarp back and just stared at it. Rusted, flat tires, paint peeling in long strips. It should have been junk, but I saw potential. I saw myself in that car. Broken, forgotten, but still worth saving. Every evening after work, I drove out to Pop's place, turning wrenches, sanding metal, listening to old records he kept in the shed. Pop never hovered, but sometimes he'd sit out there with me, smoking, silent company. His presence was enough. When I finally got the engine running, he stood outside with me, nodding slowly, a hint of pride on his weathered face. "She sounds right," was all he said, but his eyes spoke volumes. That day was the closest I'd come to happiness in a long time. I don't think I ever truly thanked Pop, but I didn't need to. He knew. That Charger became my lifeline. I poured my loneliness, my frustration, my hope into every bolt. When I drove it home that first time, I finally felt something I hadn't known in years: pride. Genuine pride. I parked it in my garage, polished every inch of chrome, and promised myself I'd never lose that feeling again. Then they took it, like they took everything else. But Pop understood them too. When I told him what had happened, lying next to his hospital bed, he squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, his eyes clear and fierce despite everything. He whispered one sentence, words I'll never forget. "You don't give them one damage. Not this time." And for once, I was ready to listen. Pop's stroke happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I'd just finished changing the oil on a '98 Ford when Mom called. Her voice shook, something it never did when it was just about me. For a second, I froze, wrench still in hand, knowing life was about to change. I drove to the hospital in Cincinnati through heavy rain. The whole way, the windshield wipers barely kept up. I felt numb, disconnected, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. Pop had always been strong, never sick a day in his life. To see him lying in that bed, eyes closed, tubes everywhere, it crushed something in me. I sat by him all night, hoping he'd wake, hoping he'd give me one of his silent nods. He didn't. Friday passed in a blur. Nurses came and went, saying things I barely heard. Evan showed up briefly, hungover, eyes glazed. Mom rubbed his back while Dad kept glancing at me, silently urging me not to say a word. I bit my tongue. It wasn't the time to fight. It was about Pop now, nothing else. Saturday was harder. Pop's breathing grew weaker. I stayed awake the entire night, counting breaths, listening to the soft hum of hospital machines. Mom and Dad took turns leaving to rest, but I couldn't leave. I owed Pop this much, after everything he'd done for me. Evan came back once more, acting restless, complaining about missing some party. I ignored him. I didn't have energy left to feel angry. Sunday morning, Mom put her hand on my shoulder gently and said I should go home. shower, get a few hours sleep. She promised to call if anything changed. My body felt hollow, drained. Reluctantly, I agreed. I thought I could trust them this one time. On the drive back, the sky was heavy, gray like my mood. Rain tapped against the windshield, steady, relentless. I remember pulling into my driveway, thinking I'd grab a quick shower, then head right back. That's when I saw the garage open, empty. The charger was gone. At first, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Did I leave the door unlocked? No, impossible. I ran inside, checked the cameras. The Wi-Fi had been unplugged. Panic set in. I called the police, hands shaking. They took a report, asked questions I couldn't answer clearly. Then my neighbor Dave walked over, holding his dog by the leash. He looked worried, confused. "Hey," he said. "Evan seemed pretty excited when he took the charger out Friday night. He said you finally let him drive it. That true?" I felt sick, dizzy, betrayed. I couldn't even speak, just nodded, mouth dry, heart pounding. Of course, they'd done it. Of course, they'd waited until I was vulnerable, distracted. Just like always. As Dave walked away, something shifted inside me. Something raw, sharp. All these years, I'd swallowed their cruelty, their lies. But this was different. The charger was the line they never should have crossed. I stood alone in that empty garage, staring at the oily stains on the floor, knowing this time I wouldn't let them win, no matter what it cost. Standing outside my parents' house, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time. The perfectly trimmed lawn, the neat row of shrubs, the curtains in the front window pulled just enough to keep things private. It was so controlled, so fake, and suddenly it made me sick. I walked in without knocking. Mom looked startled, her eyes wide. Dad folding his newspaper with a forced calmness. Evan was sprawled on the couch, legs propped up like he owned the place. And there, through the window, parked crooked in the driveway, sat my charger. Mud streaked along the side, a fresh dent in the bumper. My chest tightened, but I swallowed the rage. Mom started talking immediately, voice low, placating. She tried to explain how Evan needed something positive in his life, how I'd always been the strong one, the stable one, the one who could understand. Dad nodded along, mouth pressed into that thin line that said, "Don't cause trouble, Tom." Evan didn't even look up from his phone. He muttered something sarcastic about me always making a big deal over dumb stuff. They spoke as if the car had never really been mine, as if everything I'd worked for was something they could just casually redistribute within the family. Mom kept saying it was for the best, that Evan needed support now more than ever, that I'd always land on my feet anyway. The more they talked, the angrier I got. Not yelling angry. Quiet angry, deep angry, the kind that burned in my bones. Asked Mom how they got the title transferred. She glanced away, suddenly uneasy. Dad cleared his throat, looked at the floor, but I already knew. Evan smirked, and that confirmed everything. My parents had forged my signature, given away my car, betrayed me, without even a second thought. Because they thought I'd take it, like always. That's when Evan finally looked up, bored and irritated, and said it outright. "Come on, man. It's just a car. You're acting like a child." Something snapped. Not loudly. Quietly. The rage didn't explode, it hardened. Evan's words were a spark igniting decades of resentment I'd buried. But I didn't yell or scream or throw punches. Instead, I told him calmly that I'd be filing charges. Mom looked stunned, Dad angry, Evan laughed, until he saw my eyes. I turned around and left. Didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't even glance at the charger. Just walked out to my truck, shaking with adrenaline. Sitting there behind the wheel, I felt numb. This was my family, my blood, and they'd betrayed me without hesitation. But this time I wasn't backing down. I took out my phone, called the detective handling my case, and told him everything I knew. The forged papers, the surveillance footage I'd found on Dave's camera, the texts Evan had stupidly sent his friends bragging about his new ride. Hanging up, I stared at their house one last time, realizing the truth had been in front of me all along. They hadn't changed, I had. And this was the moment I finally drew the line. They could have each other. But they'd never take another thing from me again. After that day, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the smug look on Evan's face, Mom's dismissive eyes, Dad's silent indifference. But the anger wasn't chaotic. It gave me clarity, determination, a quiet kind of strength I hadn't felt in years. I knew if I was going to fight, I needed proof. My word alone wasn't enough, not against them. So I turned my garage into a makeshift war room. Papers and notes were pinned to the walls, surveillance footage from Dave's driveway camera replayed on a small monitor. I'd asked Dave for the video, and he handed it over immediately, embarrassed that he'd unknowingly helped them. It clearly showed Evan leaving with the charger, smiling like he'd won some prize. Next, I dug out my copy of the car title from a locked drawer in my toolbox. The forgery was obvious, the signature wasn't even close. Seeing that sloppy imitation filled me with disgust. Did they think so little of me? Or did they believe I was too weak, too beaten down to fight back? Then I remembered Evan's phone habits. He was always bragging to someone about something stupid. I reached out to one of his friends, Jake, someone who distanced himself from Evan's drama years ago. Jake was hesitant at first, wary of getting involved. But after I explained the situation, he forwarded screenshots of Evan's texts from the night he took the car. Finally got my brother's charger. Evan had texted, "Dude, put in the work and I get to drive it. Family perks." My stomach turned. Family perks. As if my effort, my sweat, my life meant nothing more than a bonus handed to him. But I had what I needed: video footage, forged documents, written proof of Evan's smug confession. The detective said it was plenty to proceed. Even he sounded angry on my behalf, quietly acknowledging how twisted the whole situation was. The day they arrested Evan, I stayed home. Didn't want to see it, didn't want to feel anything about it. But word got back anyway. Mom called, voice trembling, begging me to drop charges, insisting I was destroying our family. Dad left messages too, harsh and accusing, calling me petty, vindictive. They didn't get it, didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to. Evan never called. No surprise. Responsibility wasn't in his vocabulary. But later that night, alone in my quiet house, I found myself crying. Not for him, not even for them. I cried because it had taken so long to stand up for myself, because it hurt more deeply than I'd expected to realize they'd never loved me as they should have. But in the middle of that silent, lonely moment, I felt something else: relief. I'd broken a cycle, drawn a boundary, finally said no more. And despite everything, despite the heavy price of confronting my family's cruelty, it felt right. For the first time in forever, it felt like freedom. The courthouse felt cold and clinical, nothing like the dramas you see on TV. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, paperwork shuffled quietly, voices murmured just above whispers. Everything about the place felt surreal, especially knowing I was here to testify against my own family. When my parents entered the courtroom, they refused to look at me. Mom appeared frail, almost broken. Dad wore his familiar mask of disapproval, mouth tight, eyes narrowed in quiet anger. Evan sauntered in with his usual cockiness, acting like it was all a joke, like the rules still didn't apply to him. As I sat on the witness stand, facing them, my mouth felt dry, palms sweating. I expected rage, but all I felt was exhaustion, sadness, a profound sense of loss. I calmly described what happened: the forged title, the stolen charger, the camera footage, Evan's arrogant texts. My voice shook only once, when I explained how much work I'd put into that car, how it represented more than just metal and paint. Their lawyer tried to twist it, painting me as petty and vindictive. He suggested I was punishing Evan for old grudges, making mountains out of molehills. But when the evidence was presented, the videos, the texts, the documents, there was no room left for doubt. Even the judge seemed quietly disgusted, as if he'd seen too many families like ours, torn apart by selfishness. When Evan took the stand, he lied effortlessly, smirking as he denied everything, blaming me for exaggerating, for misunderstanding family dynamics. But the lies unraveled quickly. He stumbled over dates, contradicted himself, got flustered under the weight of evidence. Watching him break felt hollow. There was no victory here, just the empty recognition of how deep the betrayal went. Finally, the judge read his decision. Evan was guilty of receiving stolen property. My parents were guilty of theft and forgery. Evan's cocky demeanor vanished instantly, replaced by disbelief and panic. Mom gasped softly, clutching her chest. Dad stared at the floor, shaking his head slowly, blaming me in silence. I walked out without looking back. Didn't feel like celebrating. There was no relief, no sense of justice, just emptiness, a feeling of profound loss. Outside, rain had begun again, cold and steady, like the world shared my sadness. Back in my truck, I sat quietly, letting reality sink in. My family was gone. Maybe they'd been gone for years, and only now was I admitting it. Yet beneath all the grief, something else stirred. The realization that I'd stood up for myself. I'd finally said no to their cruelty, to their endless disregard. In that lonely moment in the courthouse parking lot, I understood what Pop meant about not giving an inch. Standing up had cost me family, but maybe it gave me back something even more important: my dignity. For the first time, sitting alone under the sound of the rain, I allowed myself to believe that one day, this pain would fade, and I'd find peace again. When Pop came home from the hospital, something had changed. He seemed smaller, frilier, the spark in his eyes dimmer. Doctors said we had days, maybe weeks if we were lucky. I moved into his spare room right away, refusing to let him face the end alone. After everything he'd given me, this was the least I could do. The days blurred quietly together. I made coffee, cooked simple meals, and helped him out to the porch, where he'd sit wrapped in blankets, gazing silently over the land he'd spent his life on. Most days, we didn't say much. We didn't need words. Just being there felt right, as if the quiet was saying everything that mattered. One afternoon, sitting beside him, I finally talked. I told him everything: how it felt seeing Mom's face at the courthouse, Dad's cold anger, Evan's arrogance turning into fear, how winning had somehow felt hollow, like losing in another way. Pop listened without interruption, eyes locked on the fields he'd farmed and the road he'd driven countless times. When I finished, he turned slowly and, with a faint nod, let me know he understood perfectly. Late that night, as the house settled into darkness, Pop spoke clearly for the first time in hours. He told me he'd changed the will. Everything was mine: the house, the land, even his old army pension. He'd taken precautions to make sure no one could take anything away again. He took my hand, his grip weaker than it once was, but firm enough to remind me he was still there. He looked directly at me, his eyes shining fiercely, just like the old days. "You did right, Tom," he whispered. "Standing alone hurts. But standing for yourself, well, there's honor in that." Those words sank deep, giving me strength in a way nothing else could. Pop passed quietly 2 nights later. I was right there beside him, holding his hand until he took his last breath. In that moment, I felt a pain I couldn't have imagined. But mixed with the loss was something else: gratitude. Gratitude that he taught me how to be strong enough to let go, strong enough to stand alone. When the nurse arrived later that night, she found me still holding Pop's hand. She gently told me it was time, and I slowly released my grip, letting go of the last piece of family who truly loved me. After everyone left, I sat alone in Pop's kitchen, surrounded by memories and silence. His absence was overwhelming, but beneath the grief, a quiet voice reminded me of his final words. He'd understood everything, and he believed in me. That was enough. It had to be. In the darkness, I promised myself I'd never forget what he taught me: that some battles are worth fighting, even if the cost is high, even if you fight them alone. The day we read Pop's will, the sky was gray, threatening snow. I'd barely slept since the funeral. Pop's house felt too big, too empty, echoing with memories of him in every corner. But I refused to let grief break me down, not with one last battle ahead. We met at the lawyer's office downtown, a cramped room with heavy wooden furniture and shelves lined with dusty law books. My parents sat across from me, their silence heavy, tense. Evan wasn't there. He was serving his sentence by then. The absence only made everything sadder, emptier. As the lawyer opened the envelope, Mom shifted nervously, eyes darting to mine, hopeful or fearful. I couldn't tell. Dad sat stiffly, arms crossed, jaw set stubbornly. He expected disappointment, I realized, probably for me, not them. Then the lawyer read Pop's words, clear and steady. The house, the land, savings, all of it left solely to me. Not a single mention of my parents, not 1 cent for Evan. Mom's gasp cut through the silence. She covered her mouth, eyes filling with shock, hurt, disbelief. Dad's expression darkened instantly. He glared at me, fury simmering just beneath the surface. Mom began to protest weakly, voice shaking. She said there must be a mistake. Pop wouldn't do that, couldn't do that. The lawyer patiently explained everything was legitimate. Pop had taken extra care to ensure no one could contest it. Dad accused me bitterly of poisoning Pop against them, of manipulating him in his final days. His voice rose, angry, accusing. I just sat quietly, listening to their outrage as if from far away. It hurt, but I expected nothing less. The lawyer finally asked if there was anything else. I shook my head silently. My parents stood, Mom still protesting, Dad's anger palpable. They left quickly, without looking back. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving an oppressive silence. I stayed seated for a long moment, feeling numb. The lawyer gave me a sympathetic look, said softly that Pop spoke highly of me, had made clear I was the only one he trusted. Those words hit me hard, making my eyes burn with tears I refused to shed in front of anyone. Walking out into the gray daylight, snow starting to drift gently downward, I felt more alone than ever. But also stronger. Pop had believed in me enough to make sure I'd always have a place. Always have something no one could take away. And while that didn't erase the hurt my parents caused, it made it easier to accept. Sitting in my truck, I thought about the empty house waiting for me. The quiet, the loneliness, but also the peace. Pop's last gift was more than property or money. It was a chance to start over, a new life built on truth instead of lies. For the first time since losing Pop, I felt something else mixed with the grief. Hope. Because no matter how alone I felt, Pop had left me everything I needed to finally move forward. And that was enough to hold on to, even in the bitter cold. In the months after Pop's death, I slowly rebuilt my life around the quiet rhythm of independence. At first, everything reminded me of him. The empty armchair by the window, the worn-out tools in the shed, even the old coffee cup left in the sink. But gradually, that pain became a comforting ache, a gentle reminder that he'd been there at all. The land became my sanctuary. I spent weekends clearing brush, fixing fences, painting the barn, letting the work soothe my mind. Nights were lonely at first, too silent and long, but slowly, I began enjoying them. I'd sit on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the tall grass, listening to crickets, realizing I didn't need anything more. I cut contact with my parents completely. They tried calling at first, demanding reconciliation, claiming I'd destroyed the family. But each unanswered call brought me closer to peace. Eventually, the phone stopped ringing. Evan wrote once from jail, just a single line filled with bitterness, but I never responded. Silence was my answer. Silence was my victory. The Charger sat in a new garage I built myself. Sometimes, when loneliness crept in, I'd spend hours polishing its surface or fine-tuning the engine. Driving it became my reward, the sound of its restored engine echoing through empty country roads, a constant reminder of what I'd endured and overcome. Slowly, I reconnected with old friends, people I'd pushed away because it was easier than explaining my family's dysfunction. They welcomed me back without questions, filling my weekends with simple moments of laughter and warmth. Life became smaller, simpler, better. I found comfort in routines, in cooking dinner alone, in the steady rhythm of daily chores. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I thought about my family, not with anger anymore, just sadness. I'd always wonder why they treated me as they did. But I knew I'd never find satisfying answers. Letting go of needing them was the most important step I'd ever taken. Pop had always taught me about strength, about standing alone when it mattered. Now, as I sat on the porch of his house, watching autumn leaves swirl gently through the fading sunlight, I understood exactly what he'd meant. Strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered softly in the quiet of acceptance, in the courage to live on your own terms. I didn't know what the future held, but for once, that uncertainty felt good. For the first time, the emptiness around me wasn't a void. It was space for something new to grow. Something honest. Something entirely mine. And for now, that was enough. I hadn't spoken to my family in over a year, and honestly, I didn't miss them. Time had softened the bitterness, leaving behind just a quiet sadness. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. I'd built my life from the wreckage, brick by brick, day by day, until the past finally felt distant enough to let go. I had friends now, people who showed up without expectation, who laughed with me, who respected the quiet boundaries of my new life. The small garage where I worked was busy enough to keep me comfortable. My life was simple, peaceful mine. And Pop's house had finally started feeling like home again. His memory filled the rooms, not painfully, but warmly. His strength lived in the quiet spaces between breaths, reminding me daily of what mattered. Dignity, integrity, and the quiet courage to be yourself. As I stood there in the chilly quiet, I felt a sense of closure I'd been chasing for decades. This wasn't the life I'd expected, not by a long shot, but maybe that was the point. It was the life I'd fought for, earned with pain and loss, tempered by resilience. I opened the garage door wide and climbed into the Charger, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and gasoline. Turning the key, I felt her engine rumble beneath me, strong and steady. This was mine, truly mine. Nothing could take that from me now. Pulling onto the empty road, snow lightly drifting onto the windshield, I drove without destination, enjoying the simple joy of motion, of freedom. The world around me was quiet, peaceful, untouched by the noise of the past. At a stop sign at the edge of town, I paused, staring out at the fields I'd known all my life. They were frozen now, still, patient, waiting for spring. And it hit me I was just like those fields. Finally quiet, finally still, ready for whatever came next. Pop had always believed in me. Now, at last, so did I. With that thought, I drove forward, toward the open horizon, leaving behind everything I'd known, embracing fully whatever lay ahead. Whatever came next, good or bad, it was mine forever.